Hey guys, Hornets, teachers. This is my first time reading a book, recording a book, and posting it. So it's a big day for me. And I wanted to start with my favorite book, about a book about my favorite book. This is called Alabama Spitfire. It is by Bethany Hedges. It is illustrated by Aaron McGuire. And it is the story of Harper Lee and the book that she wrote, To Kill a Mockingbird. And I love this book, To Kill a Mockingbird. It's my favorite book, hands down. I've read it more times than I can count. I've seen the movie more times than I can count. I hope that someday when you are older, you will read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I hope that it changes the way you look at the world, the way it did me. I hope it makes you think the way it made me think. So, without further ado, here we go. Alabama Spitfire. The first page right here is a quote from Atticus Finch, who is the father figure in To Kill a Mockingbird. And he says, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." And that's good advice for life, for everybody. The red soil of Monroeville, Alabama, is as rocky as the state's past. But born in the same soil are the roots of a girl who grew up to write the book of the 20th century. Nell Harper Lee entered this world on April 28, 1926. From the get-go, she was a Spitfire. I like that about her. I like Spitfires. Unlike her sisters Alice and Louise, Nell shunned what she called the pink penitentiary of girlhood. She embraced dungaree overalls, scampering up trees and rolling in tires like her brother, Edwin. Knees and elbows scrapes didn't bother her one bit. In 1929, the Great Depression hit big cities hard. But in Monroeville, even during boom times, no one had much money. Neighbors were used to helping neighbors. But Nell's hometown, even with its friendly folk, was still like the rest of the South. White people and black people attended separate schools and drank from separate water fountains. And when it came to justice, separate was most definitely not equal. We've talked about that in library. How people were judged by the color of their skin or by their hair, which really isn't fair because they didn't have anything to do with the color of their skin or their hair. Nell's dad, A.C., a lawyer, was a big believer in justice. On hot, humid afternoons, instead of going to the movies, Nell watched him try cases at the courthouse. In the evenings, Nell would climb onto his lap and read the newspaper. But before she hit first grade, Nell could read on her own. That becomes a problem for the character in To Kill a Mockingbird. Nell loved words. She loved the sounds they made, how she could string them together to appease someone or to rile them up. Words had weight. Words held meaning. And we know that. We know that words are important, not only what you say, but how you say them. So she knew that early on. And the words that she has, that the illustrator has written here, is chuckled and singular and delicacy and peculiar and establishment and bohemia. Those are pretty big words. But when it came to schoolyard conflicts, Nell preferred to use her fists. Don't take her advice. It wasn't that Nell was a bully, though she did have a temper. She just couldn't help but fight for what was fair. She always took up for the underdog, and no one was more of an underdog than Truman, a boy who came to visit his aunts for a spell and ended up living next door to Nell. So when you came to live for a spell or you did something for a spell, it just meant for a short time period. He just came to visit for a little while, and then Truman ended up living next door to Nell. Dressed in white linen suits with a high-pitched voice, True was an easy target for bullies. Nell became his friend and protector. Now, I like that about Nell. I like that she stood up for the underdogs and for the people who were being picked on and bullied. I don't like that she used her fists. There are other ways to handle that, but I do like that she stood up for them. That takes courage. Nell and True shared a love of books. Monroeville didn't have a public library, but as tight as money was, their family still made sure they both had books to read. Nell's treehouse became their secret hideout. Do you have a secret hideout? I always wanted a secret hideout. I always wanted to build a house and have a secret hideout in my house. From there, the friends could spy on the entire neighborhood. One house in particular caught their curiosity. The shutters of the Boulware's ramshackle house were always closed. Ramshackle. That's a big word. That's a good descriptive word. Look that up. See if you can tell me what it means. Nell and True knew there was a story there. They watched. They whispered. They wondered. Have you ever caught anything or saw anything like that made you wonder what was going on in that house? See, there they are in her tree house. Wonder what's going on in that house. Around this time, AC gifted Nell and True with a black Underwood No. 5 typewriter. They took turns, one dictating stories based on their treehouse spying, and the other typing. Oh, the stories they wrote. I used to write stories too when I was a little kid. I had a typewriter too that my grandfather gave me. I loved to go in my room and peck on my typewriter. Old Mrs. Busybody and the Fire and the Flame, they were in hog heaven until True's mother remarried and he moved to New York City. I bet you know how that feels. Have you ever had a friend you really, really liked move away? There wasn't anything you could do about it. Or have you ever missed someone so much? I bet that's how she felt. Nell missed True, but time marched on, even in sleepy southern towns. No girl stays a girl forever. No boy stays a boy forever either. In college, Nell didn't care about parties or fashion. As editor of the school newspaper, she cared about people, about words, about stories, both fact and fiction. I know some kids, some hornets. I know some hornets here at Reading that like to write stories. They send them to me. I print them out and I read them and I laugh sometimes. They're always very well written. Nell attended law school like her father and her older sister Alice. She didn't finish school. The same girl who had typed in the treehouse wasn't done telling stories. She made her way back to Monroeville to break the news that her dream was to be a writer. AC didn't approve, but he knew he couldn't stop his headstrong girl. Headstrong, that's a good descriptive word too. You should look that one up. So in 1949, at the age of 23, Nell boarded a northbound train. Where was she headed? Well, she was at New York City, America's literary capital, and home to her old friend, True. See her right there? The runt of Monroeville was now known as Truman Capote. Like Nell, he had never stopped writing. In fact, Nell's pal had made it big. He was a best-selling author. Nell, once True's protector, was taken under his wing. He introduced her to all the important people. And in New York, there were many important people. Nell settled into a small apartment in the Yorkville neighborhood, a long walk from the nearest subway. After a series of odd jobs, she began working in the reservation counter at the British Overseas Airway Corporation. See, even though she didn't get to do what she wanted to right away, she never gave up. She found little odd jobs here and there to help support her while she worked on achieving her dream. Any chance she had, Nell sat at her typewriter, the clicks and clacks of the keys mixing with the honks of the city traffic. She began with short stories, writing, revising, revising. That tells me even the best authors don't get it right the first time. It tells me even the best authors, the most famous of authors, had to start somewhere. They just weren't born being great writers. If you like to write, it takes practice, and you're going to make mistakes. And some of your stories aren't going to be great, and some of your stories are going to be really good. Nell worked day in and day out for 7 years. 7 years, that's a long time. But she didn't send out her stories. She didn't think her work was ready yet. But Nell was stubborn, and her Alabama Spitfire streak would not let her give up. Nell's dedication didn't go unnoticed. Some of True's fancy friends saw how hard she worked on her writing, and on Christmas Day in 1956, Nell found an envelope with her name on it pinned to their tree. It said, "Dear Nell, you have 1 year off from your job to write whatever you please. Merry Christmas." Can you believe it? 1 year off. Means she could work on it any time. She could work on it in the middle of the day. She could work on it in the middle of the night. She could work on it whenever she got inspired. That was a really great gift for them to give her. With the crash and the clatter of the city all around her, Nell left short stories behind. She began a novel. All those years of treehouse spying served her well. Nell started with what she knew best, writing about a small Alabama town inspired by her Monroeville roots. That makes sense. Write what you know. The sense of perspiration and talcum powder, the memories of lazy Sunday afternoons, the hubbub of the town square, plus the drama of watching AC in the courtroom all got mixed together to make a story as satisfying as a serving of grits and gravy. Now, I don't think grits and gravy are too satisfying for me, but you might. You know what they mean. It was very, very satisfying. And this picture right here, this illustration right here reminds me of a scene from the movie. And all of these pictures over here. Okay. Nell's first 50 pages landed her an agent. Then she wrote 50 more and 50 more. Once her agent sold her book, she worked with an editor and rewrote it again and again. See, didn't get it right the first time or the second time. She had to write it a third time before the agent, her literary agent, thought it was good enough. Okay? That's what all these pages are. And unlike the computers that we have today, where you can just backspace and delete everything before you print it, she was writing her story on an old typewriter that if you made a mistake, you had to go back with this little whiteout or this little sheet or erase it. It was not as easy as it is today. So imagine having to do that 3 times. After 3 years and many titles, Nell's book, To Kill a Mockingbird, was ready at last. The world met the residents of Macomb County on July 11th, 1960. Nell, the girl who fought playground injustice, was at it again, publishing a book where a small town and its people struggled with what was wrong and what was right. I think we still struggle with what's wrong and what's right. I know we do. And where skin color didn't automatically make one guilty. That's a concept. Just because your skin is a certain color doesn't mean you're guilty. Doesn't mean you're anything other than a human. I like that. Everyone in Alabama was talking about her book, too. To Kill a Mockingbird flew off the shelves, making bestseller lists all over the country. It even won the Pulitzer Prize, the biggest literary award in the United States. But Nell's small town story wasn't bound to be just a book. Before long, it became an award-winning movie, too. Nell, the Alabama Spitfire, was famous. Oh, I have goosebumps because how much I love this book and how much I love the movie. I read the book when I was in middle school. I think 8th grade, maybe. My lit teacher had us read it. And I thought it was going to be one of those boring books that you have to read. But boy, did I change my mind pretty quickly. It really made an impact on me. And then when we were finished reading the book, we got to watch the movie. And it's just one of the best movies. One of my favorites. But Nell didn't like the limelight. The feeling of success, Nell said, was like being hit over the head and knocked cold. Nell found herself in a new fight, one for her privacy. How would she tackle this? Not with fists, not with stories, but what? With silence. Nell shut out reporters, declining interviews and rarely making public appearances. Even so, her book continued to sell. To Kill a Mockingbird caused readers, all readers, to imagine themselves as Scout, as Atticus, as Tom Robinson, to climb into his skin and walk around in it. In doing so, Nell's book sold over 40 million copies. Scout is the little girl who, after reading this, reminds me a lot of Nell. She's the little girl, and the story is told from her point of view. Atticus Finch, is her father, who is a lawyer, just like Nell's father, AC, was. And Tom Robinson, I don't know that Tom Robinson is anyone specific in Nell's life, but he was an African-American man who was accused of a crime that he didn't commit. So what became of Harper Lee, the tomboy turned author? Did she hide away in the big city, where she was one of many, or did she seek solace in her hometown, where she was simply Miss Nell? Nell chose both. For over 40 years, she hopped trains and lived part of the year amid skyscrapers and part of the year amid Alabama fishing holes. She carved out a life of her own. That sounds like a great way to do things. To be able to just hang out where you want. The red, rocky soil of her youth welcomed Nell home for good in her 80s. Reporters still clamored for interviews, but Nell's steely Spitfire streak held strong. At the age of 89, the girl who grew up to be Harper Lee died. Nell is buried in Monroeville, the town she made famous in fictional form. And To Kill a Mockingbird continues to do the speaking and fighting for her. It sure does. It sure does. See how powerful words are? See how powerful words are? Crazy, huh? It's something that she wrote so long ago is still having an effect. Okay. Here is, I'm going to read you the author's note. For many, including me, there is no book more beloved than Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. Not me. It is taught with chapters being excerpted as early as 4th grade in schools all over the country. In Mr. Dykman's 5th grade class, I read the title scene where Atticus encounters the rabid dog. I was hooked. That's a pretty cool scene, too. That summer, I read the book cover to cover and did so once a year for over 20 years. In surveys, To Kill a Mockingbird is listed after only the Bible as America's favorite book. That's saying something. Though beloved the world over, not much is known about its author, Nell Harper Lee, who hadn't given a sit-down interview since 1964, just 4 years after its publication. I began this book before the death of Harper Lee. As a writer, knowing how strongly my childhood shaped me, I started rooting around in Nell's. Her early life in Monroeville, Alabama had a major impact on her work and was where the story seeds for To Kill a Mockingbird got planted. In fact, the book spans 3 years, 1932 to 1935, when Nell and the fictional scout grew from 6 to 9 years old. And of course, there's Nell's friendship with Truman Capote, who said in interviews that Scout, Jim, and Dill's attempts to get Boo Radley to make an appearance are quite literal and true, and are based on their fascination with the bowl wearer's son. Now, Jim, that's Scout's older brother, and Dill, that was Truman Capote's character in the book. From 1949 to 1960, as a young writer in New York, Nell worked tirelessly at her craft. I mean, she didn't give up. She worked and worked and worked. As a reward for her diligence, Nell's good friends, Michael and Joy Brown, funded her year of writing and helped her to get her work seen by an agent, Maurice Crane. Crane liked her short stories, but encouraged Nell to write a novel. Crane sold Nell's work in progress to publisher J.B. Lippincott with an advance of a few $1,000s. With her editor, Teresa Tay von Hoff, Nell revised the novel that would become To Kill a Mockingbird. Nell dropped her first name and published under the name Harper Lee. She didn't want her first and last names to run together. Sorry. With Nell Lee pronounced as Nellie. Well, that makes sense. A few weeks after publication in July 1960, To Kill a Mockingbird was a top 10 bestseller in both the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. At a time when racial injustice garnered the national news spotlight, the book became a phenomenon. The same year the book was published, students in Greensboro, North Carolina, staged a sit-in at a segregated Woolworth's lunch counter, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC, was formed. Nell's book may have been set in the Great Depression, but it also spoke to what was happening in the country in the Civil Rights era when it was published. In 1961, the novel won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. In 1962, the film adaptation won 3 Academy Awards. Best Writing for Horton Foote's adapted screenplay. That means the screenwriter took the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, and revised it and condensed it and made it so that they could put it into a script. Best Actor for Gregory Peck's portrayal of Atticus Finch. I love Gregory Peck. He did a great job. And Best Art Direction. These awards secured both the book and the movie adaptation a place in history. The amount of interview requests and fan mail Nell received increased, and in every interview, Nell was asked about her next book. In one interview, she answered, "Yes, and it goes slowly, ever so slowly." But as time went on and another book did not appear, Nell became more and more of a recluse. Her answer changed to variations of, "I've said all I have to say." When Nell was 88, a novel she had written in the 1950s was discovered and released. Go Set a Watchman caused fans old and young to flock to bookstores and order copies online, creating another media frenzy. Nell died 7 months after Go Set a Watchman's release. Amid all the hoopla, Nell stayed silent. She continued to let both stories speak directly to the readers. I was one of those fans. When I heard out Go Set a Watchman was coming out, I went to Barnes & Noble or Amazon, I can't remember, and pre-ordered it because there was no way I was going to miss one of Harper Lee's books. So I hope you enjoyed Alabama Spitfire and my first time reading and recording a video for you guys. Let me know what you think.